No man would ever want you. You're lucky I'm even managing you." Daniel screamed at his wife, Grace, unaware that his billionaire boss, Mr. Adelike, was standing right outside their door, having come to return Daniel's forgotten work files. What the boss did next will shock you. Before we continue, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our dramatic stories. And to my loyal family who've been rocking with us, drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. The walls of their small two-bedroom apartment seemed to close in as Daniel's voice echoed through the cramped living room. Grace Okafor stood by the kitchen counter, her hands trembling as she gripped the edge of the worn laminate surface. At 32, she was a beautiful, dark-skinned woman with gentle eyes that had long ago learned to hide their pain behind a mask of quiet endurance. "I'm sorry," Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. "I just thought we should save money this month instead of what?" Daniel cut her off, his face contorted with rage. At 34, he was a man who had learned that cruelty could be disguised as strength, that breaking someone down could make him feel bigger. "Instead of me buying what I want with my money, the money I work for while you sit at home playing with needles and thread?" Grace flinched at the dismissal of her work. Her sewing business, run from their spare bedroom, brought in nearly as much as Daniel's salary as a senior manager at Adeleke Industries. She made custom dresses for clients, repaired clothes for the neighborhood, and even donated pieces to charity events. But Daniel had spent 8 years convincing her that her contributions meant nothing. "I contribute to the bills," Grace said softly, finding a small spark of courage. "My sewing business. Your little hobby?" Daniel laughed cruelly, and his friend Marcus, sprawled on their threadbare couch, joined in. Marcus had stopped by an hour ago and had been drinking Daniel's beer ever since, encouraging his friend's worst behavior. "Come on, man," Marcus chuckled. "You know Grace is lucky to have you. I mean, look at her. No education, no real job, no prospects. Where would she be without you?" Grace's jaw tightened. She had a degree in business administration from the university, graduated with honors. But 8 years of Daniel's systematic destruction had buried that confident graduate under layers of self-doubt and learned helplessness. She'd stopped mentioning her degree after the first year of marriage when Daniel called it a useless piece of paper from a second-rate school. "Exactly," Daniel agreed, pointing at Grace. "You should be grateful I even married you. No one else would have taken you." The apartment reflected their unequal relationship. Daniel's expensive shoes lined the entrance, 3 pairs of designer sneakers he'd bought last month. His cologne collection cluttered the bathroom counter. His clothes filled most of their shared closet. Meanwhile, Grace's possessions occupied minimal space. Her sewing machine in the corner of the spare room, a small rack of her handmade dresses, and a worn suitcase under the bed containing the few items she'd brought to the marriage. From the apartment next door, Mama Eunice listened through the thin walls with a heavy heart. The 70-something-year-old woman had watched Grace's light dim over the years. She remembered when Grace first moved in, bright-eyed, hopeful, talking about starting a fashion business. Now, Mama Eunice rarely saw that spark anymore. "I'm going out," Daniel announced, grabbing his keys. "And when I come back, I want this place spotless. Maybe if you spent less time on your useless sewing and more time being a proper wife, I wouldn't have to go elsewhere for peace." The implication hung in the air. Grace knew about Chioma, the woman from Daniel's office. Everyone knew. The neighbors whispered. Daniel's friends made jokes, but Grace had nowhere to go. No family in the city. Her parents had passed away years ago. No close friends. Daniel had systematically isolated her from everyone who might remind her of her worth. After Daniel and Marcus left, slamming the door behind them, Grace slowly walked to the spare room. Her sanctuary, the space where she created beauty from fabric, where her hands remembered skills her heart had forgotten she possessed. She ran her fingers over a partially completed dress, elegant emerald piece commissioned for a client's daughter's wedding. "One day, Daniel," she whispered to the empty room, "you'll realize what you threw away." But even as she said it, she didn't quite believe it herself. 8 years of emotional abuse had taught her to doubt her own worth, to see herself through Daniel's cruel lens. What Grace didn't know was that her words were about to become prophetic. What she couldn't see was that outside, in the hallway, A well-dressed man in his mid-40s stood frozen with his hand raised to knock. Mr. James Adeleke, CEO of Adeleke Industries and Daniel's boss, had heard everything, every cruel word, every dismissive laugh, every bit of emotional violence inflicted on the woman inside. He had come to return the work files Daniel had left at the office. But now, standing in that hallway with the files in his hand, James Adeleke made a decision. He'd seen Grace before at company events, always quiet, always in Daniel's shadow, always with that sad smile that never reached her eyes. He'd seen the bruises she tried to hide. He'd heard the way Daniel spoke about his wife to colleagues when he thought no one important was listening. James had built his empire on one principle: recognizing value where others saw nothing. And right now, through that thin apartment door, he heard something that confirmed what he'd long suspected. Daniel Okafor was a fool throwing away a diamond because he was too blind to see past the dust. The files could wait, but Grace's rescue couldn't. As he turned to leave, James made a phone call. "Hello, Mrs. Adeyemi. Please prepare the guest house. We'll be having a visitor soon, someone special who deserves far better than she's been given." Inside the apartment, Grace wiped her tears and returned to her sewing. She didn't know that her life was about to change. She didn't know that sometimes being thrown away is the first step to discovering you were treasure all along. 3 days after Mr. Adeleke's visit to the apartment building, Daniel came home drunk. He stumbled through the door at 2 a.m, reeking of alcohol and cheap perfume. Grace had waited up, as she always did, sitting at the kitchen table with her sewing work spread before her, a client's order that needed to be finished by morning. "You're still awake?" Daniel slurred, his eyes bloodshot and unfocused. "Of course you are. Probably waiting to nag me about where I've been." Grace said nothing. She'd learned that silence was sometimes the only protection she had. She continued her careful stitching on a cream-colored dress, her hands steady even as her heart raced. Daniel stumbled to the bedroom, and Grace heard drawers opening and closing. Then she heard it, the sound that made her blood run cold. The small metal box where she kept her savings, the one she'd hidden behind her winter clothes in the closet. The box containing $3,000, 2 years of carefully saved money from her sewing business, $5 here, $20 there, hidden from Daniel's controlling grasp. Daniel stormed out of the bedroom holding the metal box. "What is this? You've been hiding money from me? Stealing from your own husband?" "That's my sewing money," Grace said quietly. "I saved it in case." "In case you wanted to leave me?" he roared, throwing the box across the room. Bills scattered everywhere. When Grace bent to pick them up, Daniel grabbed her arm and shoved her back into the counter. Pain shot through her hip, but something inside her hardened. Maybe no man would want me," she said steadily, "but that's better than being with a man who doesn't." Furious, Daniel stormed into her sewing room and began tearing her dresses apart. Grace cried out as weeks of work were destroyed. Mama Eunice knocked, alarmed. When she saw the mess and Grace's bruised face, she spoke firmly, calling Daniel to shame. "I'm done," Daniel snapped. "Pack your things and get out of my house." For the first time, Grace felt relief. "Okay," she said. She packed her suitcase calmly, took her sewing machine, and walked out despite the rain. Daniel called his mistress as she left, but his words no longer hurt. Grace stepped into the night with $43, no plan, and her freedom. Sitting outside in the rain, fear mixed with hope. Then a car pulled up. "Mrs. Okafor," a voice said gently, "we need to talk." Grace looked up to see Mr. James Adeleke, Daniel's billionaire boss, holding an umbrella. He helped her into his car, gave her his jacket, and spoke with quiet regret. "I came to return Daniel's files 3 days ago," he said. "I heard everything. I suspected before, and I did nothing. I'm sorry." For the first time in years, Grace saw respect in someone's eye and felt the beginning of a new life. "You didn't know," Grace said automatically, the pattern of excusing others for Daniel's behavior deeply ingrained. "I should have known. I should have acted." Mr. Adeleke leaned forward, his expression intense. "Grace, I'm a businessman. I've built my company on one fundamental principle, recognizing value where others fail to see it. And I'm looking at extraordinary value that's been criminally undervalued." Grace shook her head. "Mr. Adeleke, I appreciate your kindness, but Daniel's right about me. I'm just a housewife with a sewing hobby. I have no real prospects." "Stop," Mr. Adeleke interrupted. Do you know what I did before I came to your building 3 days ago? I researched you. Grace Okafor, bachelor's degree in business administration from the University of Lagos, graduated with honors. Dean's List 3 consecutive years. Your thesis on textile industry economics was published in an academic journal. Grace's eyes widened. She hadn't thought about that thesis in years. Daniel had told her it was worthless, that no one cared about academic publications. I also, Mr. Adeleke continued, attended a charity gala 6 months ago where several dresses were auctioned to raise money for orphanages. 3 of those dresses sold for $5,000 each. Do you know who made them? Grace's hand flew to her mouth. I donated those. I didn't know they sold for that much. Because you're not just a seamstress, Grace. You're a designer, an artist, and watching your husband destroy your work tonight, his jaw tightened. That was watching a vandal destroy a gallery. The car pulled up to a beautiful estate on the outskirts of the city. Through the gates, Grace could see a main house illuminated against the night sky, and beside it, a smaller but equally elegant guest house. Where are we? Grace asked. My home. And before you protest, hear me out. Mr. Adeleke turned to face her fully. The guest house is vacant. It has 2 bedrooms, a full kitchen, and plenty of space. I'm offering it to you rent-free until you get back on your feet. I can't accept charity. It's not charity. It's an investment. Mr. Adeleke smiled. I'm also offering you a job. Adeleke Industries is expanding into fashion and corporate uniforms. I need someone to head that division. Someone with business acumen, design talent, and the resilience to build something from nothing. I'm looking at that someone right now. Grace felt tears streaming down her face again, but these were different from the tears she'd cried earlier. These tears came from a place she'd thought Daniel had killed. Hope. Why? She whispered. Why would you do this for me? Mr. Adeleke's expression softened. My mother was in a marriage like yours. My father broke her down day by day until she believed she was worthless. When he finally left us, she was devastated. But then something miraculous happened. She remembered who she was. She started a small catering business that eventually became the foundation of my empire. She taught me that people's true worth isn't determined by those who fail to see it. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. This is a contract. Head of Fashion Division, competitive salary, benefits, creative freedom. Read it, think about it, and if you're interested, we'll start Monday. Either way, the guest house is yours for as long as you need it. Grace opened the folder with trembling hands. The salary listed was more than Daniel made in a year. The position came with an office, a team, a budget for her to build her vision. It was everything she dreamed of when she graduated university, before Daniel convinced her that her dreams were foolish. I don't know what to say, Grace whispered. Say yes, came a warm voice from outside the car. An elderly, dark-skinned woman in her 60s stood by the car door, smiling kindly. Say yes, and let's get you inside where it's warm. This is Mrs. Adeyemi, my housekeeper and the woman who helped raise me after my father left, Mr. Adeleke said. She runs this household with an iron fist, and what she says goes. Mrs. Adeyemi opened the car door. Come, child. You look half frozen. We'll get you warm fed and into a proper bed. Tomorrow, you can think about contracts and jobs. Tonight, you just need to be safe. As Grace stepped out of the car, still wearing Mr. Adeleke's jacket, she felt something shift inside her. She'd left Daniel's apartment with nothing, believing she was worthless. But standing here, offered kindness by strangers who saw value in her, Grace began to see the truth Daniel had hidden from her for 8 years. She wasn't worthless. She'd never been worthless. She'd just been with someone determined to make her believe she was. Mr. Adeleke, she said, turning back to him. I don't need until Monday. My answer is yes. He smiled, and it transformed his serious face into something warm and genuine. Then welcome to Adeleke Industries, Grace. I have a feeling you're going to change everything. As Mrs. Adeyemi led Grace toward the guest house, chattering about hot soup and warm blankets, Grace looked back at the main road. Somewhere out there, in their small apartment, Daniel was probably celebrating with Chioma, convinced he'd finally freed himself from dead weight. He had no idea that he'd just thrown away a diamond. And by Monday morning, when Grace walked into Adeleke Industries as an executive, he'd begin to learn the most painful lesson of his life. That value doesn't disappear just because you're too blind to see it. Monday morning arrived with golden sunshine streaming through the windows of the guest house. Grace stood before the full-length mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back. Mrs. Adeyemi had taken her shopping over the weekend, insisting that a department head needed a proper wardrobe. The navy blue power suit fit perfectly, tailored to Grace's figure. Her natural hair, which Daniel had always criticized as unprofessional, was styled in an elegant updo. For the first time in 8 years, Grace looked like the university graduate who had walked across the stage with honors. Confident, capable, powerful. "You look like a queen," Mrs. Adeyemi said from the doorway, her eyes misty with pride. "Are you ready?" Grace took a deep breath. "I'm terrified." "Good. Fear means you care. It's the ones who feel nothing you have to worry about." Mrs. Adeyemi squeezed her shoulder. "Remember, child, you earned this position. Not because of charity, but because James Adeleke doesn't make bad business decisions. He sees what that fool husband of yours was too blind to see." The drive to Adeleke Industries felt both endless and too short. The building was a gleaming tower of glass and steel in the heart of the business district. Grace had been here before, always as Daniel's shadow at company events, always quiet and diminished. Today, she walked through the front entrance as an executive, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. "Good morning, Miss Okafor," the receptionist greeted her with a warm smile. "Mr. Adeleke is expecting you. 10th floor, corner office." Grace's hands trembled slightly as she pressed the elevator button. The 10th floor was executive territory, where the company's leadership made decisions that shaped the entire organization. She'd never been up there before. The elevator doors opened to reveal a sophisticated workspace with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A nameplate on one office door stopped her heart. Grace Okafor, head of fashion division. Impressive, isn't it? Mr. Adeleke appeared beside her, coffee in hand. "Your office. Your team is waiting in the conference room. We have a Monday morning meeting with all department heads in 30 minutes. He paused, his expression becoming serious. "Grace, I should warn you, Daniel will be at that meeting. Are you ready to face him?" Grace straightened her shoulders. "I have to be." "You don't have to be anything," Mr. Adeleke corrected gently, "but I believe you want to be. There's a difference." 25 minutes later, Grace sat in the executive conference room, her portfolio open before her, her preliminary designs for the company uniform rebrand spread across the table. Other department heads filed in, marketing, operations, finance, human resources. They greeted Grace with curious but welcoming smiles, clearly briefed on the new hire. Then Daniel walked in, late as usual, coffee in hand, already talking loudly on his phone. "Yeah, man, I'm telling you, I'm finally free. Got rid of the dead weight. Now I can really focus on..." He stopped mid-sentence. His phone clattered to the floor. Grace sat at the executive table, poised and professional, between the CFO and the head of operations. She met Daniel's shocked gaze with calm composure, though her heart hammered in her chest. "Daniel, you're late," Mr. Adeleke said coolly from the head of the table. "Please take your seat. We have a lot to cover." Daniel stumbled to an empty chair, his eyes never leaving Grace. His face cycled through emotions, shock, confusion, anger, humiliation. Around the table, other executives noticed the tension but remained professional. "Let's begin," Mr. Adeleke continued. "As you all know, we're expanding into new markets. Leading that expansion is our fashion division, headed by Grace Okafor. Grace brings both business expertise and creative vision to this role. Grace, would you like to present your preliminary proposal?" Grace stood, and for a moment, the old fear threatened to overwhelm her. 8 years of Daniel's voice in her head. "You're not smart enough. No one wants to hear what you have to say. You're embarrassing yourself." But then she looked at Mr. Adeleke's encouraging nod, at the interested faces of her new colleagues, and she heard a different voice, her own voice, the one Daniel had silenced. "Thank you, Mr. Adeleke," Grace began, her voice steady and clear. She activated the presentation on the screen behind her. The corporate uniform market is valued at $15 billion annually, but most companies treat uniforms as an afterthought, purely functional with no consideration for comfort, dignity, or brand identity. I propose we change that. She clicked through her designs, elegant, practical uniforms that honored the people wearing them while elevating the company's image. The room leaned forward, engaged. Daniel couldn't help himself. This seems frivolous, he interrupted, his voice dripping with condescension. We're a serious business, not a fashion show. The room went silent. Everyone knew Daniel and Grace were married or had been. The personal nature of his dismissal was obvious and unprofessional. Grace turned to him, and when she spoke, her voice was calm but firm. Actually, Daniel, studies show that employee satisfaction and productivity increase by 35% when uniforms are comfortable and dignified. Additionally, strong visual branding through uniforms increases customer trust by 42%. This isn't frivolous, it's strategic, but I appreciate your concern. Several executives nodded approvingly. Daniel's face reddened, realizing he'd been professionally checked. The meeting continued for another hour. Grace fielded questions, adjusted proposals, and demonstrated a command of both design and business strategy that impressed everyone in the room. By the time Mr. Adeleke adjourned the meeting, Grace had secured approval for a 6-month pilot program with a substantial budget. As people filed out, Daniel tried to approach Grace, but she gathered her materials and walked out with the CFO, deep in conversation about budget projections. She didn't look back. Over the following weeks, the transformation was dramatic. Grace threw herself into her work with the passion of someone finally freed to use gifts long suppressed. Her designs were brilliant. Her business presentations were sharp. Her team, 3 designers and 2 administrative staff, adored her leadership style, so different from the dictatorial management they'd experienced before. Meanwhile, Daniel's performance crumbled. He made errors in client proposals. He missed deadlines. He showed up late to meetings. His colleagues, who once laughed at his cruel jokes about his wife, now watched him with a mixture of pity and disapproval. Word had spread about what he'd done, how he'd treated Grace, how he'd thrown her out. In the corporate hallways, people began to whisper. One afternoon, Grace was leaving her office when she found Daniel waiting by the elevator. They were alone. "Grace," he started, his voice uncertain, so different from his usual arrogance. "Can we talk?" "We have nothing to discuss professionally, Daniel. If you need to speak with Fashion Division, schedule a meeting through my assistant." "I'm not talking about work." His frustration bubbled over. "What is this? You think you're better than me now? You think because you have a fancy title and an office that you've won something?" Grace pressed the elevator button, her expression neutral. "I don't think I'm better than you, Daniel. I simply know I'm not worse. There's a difference. I gave you everything." "You gave me nothing," Grace interrupted, her voice quiet but devastating. "You took everything. My confidence, my dreams, my sense of worth. But here's what you didn't understand. Those things were always mine. You didn't give them to me, so you couldn't really take them away. You just convinced me they were gone. I'm not mad at you, Daniel. I pity you." The elevator arrived. Grace stepped in. "I lost everything because of you." Daniel's voice rose desperately. Grace held the elevator door, looking at him with something that might have been compassion. "No, Daniel, you lost everything because of who you were, not because of me. I hope one day you understand that." The doors closed on his stunned face, and Grace released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands shook, adrenaline flooding her system, but underneath the fear was something stronger: pride. She'd faced her abuser in his territory and held her ground. When she returned to the guest house that evening, Mrs. Adeyemi had dinner waiting. Over the meal, Grace shared her day, the small victories, the challenges, the moment with Daniel. "You're blooming," Mrs. Adeyemi said with satisfaction. "Like a plant that was kept in the dark, finally brought into sunlight. You're remembering who you always were." That night, Grace looked through her bedroom window at the main house, where lights glowed warmly. Mr. Adeleke was probably in his study, working late as he always did. Over the past weeks, their relationship had remained purely professional, but Grace had noticed small things: how he made sure her office had the afternoon sunlight she preferred, how he'd quietly replaced her aging sewing machine with a top-of-the-line model for the fashion division, how he asked about her day with genuine interest. She wasn't ready for anything romantic. Her wounds were too fresh, her trust too shattered, but it was nice to know that somewhere in the world there were men who saw women as equals, as partners, as fully human. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Grace, it's Chioma. We need to talk about Daniel." Call me. Grace deleted the message without responding. She had no interest in Daniel's drama anymore. She'd wasted 8 years on him. She wouldn't waste another second. The weeks following Grace's confrontation with Daniel brought dramatic changes to both their lives, changes that rippled through Adeleke Industries and beyond like stones thrown into still water. For Daniel, the unraveling was swift and merciless. 2 weeks after the executive meeting, Mr. Adeleke called him into his office. Daniel walked in with false confidence, assuming he was being called to discuss a project. Instead, he found HR Director Mrs. Oladele sitting beside Mr. Adeleke, a thick folder on the desk between them. "Sit down, Daniel," Mr. Adeleke said, his tone professional but cold. Daniel sat, his palms suddenly sweaty. "Sir, if this is about the Henderson account, I can explain. This isn't about one account. This is about a pattern." Mr. Adeleke opened the folder. 3 major clients lost in the past month due to errors in your proposals, 5 missed deadlines, 7 complaints from team members about your behavior, and most concerning, reports from multiple employees about your inappropriate comments regarding your wife, your ex-wife, in the workplace. Daniel's face paled. "Sir, I'm not finished," Mr. Adeleke continued, his voice hardening. "I've tolerated a lot over the years, Daniel. But what I will not tolerate is an employee who creates a hostile work environment, who undermines colleagues, and who treats his personal life as office entertainment. You've been spreading rumors about Grace, making crude comments, trying to turn people against her. It ends now." Mrs. Oladele spoke up. "We've conducted interviews with your team members. The picture they paint is troubling. Bullying, inappropriate jokes, taking credit for others' work. The Henderson account failure, that was because you plagiarized a junior team member's proposal and presented it as your own. When the client asked questions, you couldn't answer them because you didn't understand the work." Daniel felt the room spinning. "You can't fire me over this. I've been with this company for 6 years. 7 years, Mr. Adeleke corrected. 7 years during which you coasted on mediocre performance while better employees did the heavy lifting. 7 years during which I ignored warning signs because you managed to stay just barely above the line. But that line has moved, Daniel, and you're not just below it, you're nowhere near it." "This is about Grace, isn't it?" Daniel's voice rose with desperation and anger. "You're firing me because of her, because you." He stopped, realizing what he was about to accuse his boss of. Mr. Adeleke stood, his imposing height making Daniel shrink in his chair. "Be very careful with your next words. Grace earned her position through talent and hard work. You lost yours through incompetence and cruelty. If you want to blame someone for your failures, look in the mirror. I have a mortgage, car payments. Should have thought about that before you threw away a wife who was contributing to those bills." Adeleke said coldly. "You told Grace that no man would ever want her. You told her she was worthless. You destroyed her work, her savings, her confidence. And now you're discovering that actions have consequences. Your termination is effective immediately. HR will handle your exit paperwork. Security will escort you from the building." Daniel stumbled out of the office in shock. As security walked him to his desk to collect his belongings, he saw Grace through her office window, leading a team meeting, laughing at something one of her designers said. She looked radiant, confident, alive. She didn't even glance his way. The humiliation of being escorted from the building in front of his former colleagues was crushing, but worse was what waited at home. Chioma, the woman he'd left Grace for, was packing her bags. "Where are you going?" Daniel asked, his world crumbling around him. Chioma didn't even look at him. "Somewhere you're not." "I didn't sign up for broken unemployed, Daniel. I thought you were going places. Turns out the only place you're going is down. But I love you. You love what I represented." Chioma cut him off, finally turning to face him. "Status, youth, freedom from your boring wife. Well, congratulations. You're free, and you're alone, and you're broke. Have fun with that." She left, slamming the door behind her. Daniel sank onto the couch in the apartment he could no longer afford, surrounded by the expensive things he'd bought with money that should have been saved. Designer shoes, the latest electronics, luxury items that now seemed like monuments to his stupidity. Over the next months, Daniel's fall continued. Word spread in his industry about his firing. Job applications went unanswered. His savings meager because he'd spent everything on maintaining appearances, ran out. He was evicted from the apartment and ended up sleeping on his friend Marcus's couch, but even Marcus grew tired of supporting him. "Man, you need to get it together," Marcus said one evening after Daniel had spent another day drinking and feeling sorry for himself. "Maybe try apologizing to Grace. See if she'll..." "Apologize?" Daniel's laugh was bitter. "For what? For telling her the truth? She was nothing before me." "She's an executive at one of the city's top companies now," Marcus interrupted. "She's been featured in business magazines. Her fashion line is being picked up by 3 international companies. Meanwhile, you're on my couch, unemployed and feeling sorry for yourself. Who was nothing, Daniel?" The words hit like physical blows. Daniel had been avoiding social media, avoiding news about Adeleke Industries, avoiding anything that might show him Grace's success. But that night, alone while Marcus went out, Daniel broke down and searched for her name. The results were overwhelming. Grace had been interviewed by several business publications. Her story, though she never mentioned Daniel by name, was inspiring. A woman who'd lost everything, took a chance, and built something extraordinary. Her designs were being praised. Her leadership was being studied. She'd become a symbol of resilience and transformation. And in several photos, standing beside her at industry events was Mr. Adeleke. The articles were careful to note they were professional colleagues, but Daniel could see something in the way Adeleke looked at Grace. Respect, admiration, and something deeper that was waiting for Grace to be ready. The realization hit Daniel like a freight train. He hadn't just lost a wife. He'd lost a partner, a talent, a woman who could have built an empire with him if he'd been smart enough to recognize her worth. Instead, he'd torn her down to make himself feel bigger, never realizing he was destroying the very thing that could have elevated them both. 6 months after Grace left, Daniel hit rock bottom. He'd applied to over 50 jobs with no success. He'd lost his car. He was living in a shelter, working day labor just to afford food. And one afternoon, while cleaning an office building, he looked up at a billboard across the street. It was Grace, elegant in a designer suit, standing beside Mr. Adeleke, promoting Adeleke Industries' new fashion line. The tagline read, "True value cannot be hidden." Daniel sat down on the curb and finally let himself feel the full weight of what he'd done. He'd had treasure and treated it like trash. He'd had a partner and treated her like a burden. He'd had love, or at least the opportunity for it, and he'd destroyed it with his cruelty and insecurity. That evening, Daniel did something he hadn't done in years. He called a therapist using the free mental health hotline. For the first time, he began to examine not just what he'd lost, but why he'd been so determined to destroy it in the first place. Meanwhile, Grace's transformation was complete. Her fashion division had become Adeleke Industries' most profitable new venture. She'd been promoted to vice president. She'd moved from the guest house into her own luxury apartment, though she still had dinner with Mr. Adeleke and Mrs. Adeyemi twice a week. They'd become her chosen family. She'd also started dating again, casually, learning to trust her own judgment about people. And while nothing serious had developed yet, she was no longer afraid of connection. The therapy she'd started had helped her process the abuse, understand it wasn't her fault, and recognize her own worth, independent of anyone else's validation. 1 year after leaving Daniel's apartment in the rain, Grace stood at a podium in a convention center, keynote speaker at a women's business conference. The audience of 500 women listened in rapt attention as she shared her story. "I want you to understand something," Grace said, her voice carrying clearly through the room. "When someone tells you you're worthless, that's not information about you. That's information about them. Healthy people don't diminish others. Secure people don't need to tear others down to feel elevated. When someone tries to make you feel small, it's because they feel small, and they're hoping your shrinking will make them feel bigger." The audience applauded, and Grace felt tears in her eyes, not of pain, but of gratitude. She'd walked through fire and emerged not burned, but refined. 1 year and 6 months after Grace left Daniel's apartment in the rain, the grand ballroom of the Millennium Hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers and the city's elite. The annual Business Excellence Gala honored the year's most innovative companies and leaders. Grace stood near the entrance in an emerald gown she'd designed herself, her arm linked with James Adeliki's. Their relationship had evolved slowly, carefully, from professional respect to genuine friendship to something deeper. 3 months ago, he'd asked her to dinner. Not as colleagues, but as a man interested in a remarkable woman. She'd said yes. "You look nervous," James whispered, squeezing her hand gently. "We're receiving an award in front of 500 people," Grace smiled. "I'm terrified." The woman who rebuilt her life from nothing is terrified of a trophy? That woman is still learning to accept recognition without waiting for it to be taken away. James's expression softened with understanding. "It won't be. You earned this, Grace. Not because of luck or charity, but because you're extraordinary." The ceremony began, and Grace barely heard the first few awards, her mind racing. Then she heard it. The Innovation in Business Award goes to Grace Okafor and the fashion division of Adeleke Industries for revolutionizing corporate uniform design and creating sustainable, dignified workwear that's been adopted by over 200 companies worldwide. The applause was thunderous. Grace stood on shaking legs, James beside her, and walked to the stage. As she accepted the Crystal Award, her eyes swept the audience and stopped. In the back, partially hidden behind a pillar, wearing a waiter's uniform, was Daniel. Their eyes met for a brief moment. He looked older, humbled, the arrogance gone from his posture. He was working as event staff, serving drinks to the very people who now celebrated his ex-wife's success. Grace turned to the microphone, her heart pounding, but her voice steady. "Thank you for this honor. 18 months ago, I had nothing. No job, no home, no confidence. Someone told me I was worthless, and I almost believed him. But then I learned something crucial. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see your worth." She paused, seeing Daniel lower his head in the back of the room. "I'm not here to shame anyone or celebrate anyone's downfall. I'm here to tell you that rock bottom can be a foundation, that ending can be a beginning, that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover you had everything you needed inside you all along." The audience stood, applauding. Grace stepped off the stage into James's embrace, tears streaming down her face, not from pain, but from the pure joy of becoming herself again. Later, as guests mingled during the reception, Daniel approached hesitantly. Grace saw him coming and squared her shoulders. James moved to stand beside her, protective but respectful. "Grace," Daniel said quietly, his voice rough. "Congratulations. You deserve this." Grace studied him, really looked at him. The cruel man who'd torn her down was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely broken and perhaps genuinely sorry. "Thank you," she said simply. "I've been in therapy," Daniel continued, the words tumbling out. "Working on myself, understanding why I hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know I was wrong. About everything. You were never the problem. I was, and I'm sorry." Grace felt James's hand at the small of her back, supportive, but leaving the choice to her. She could walk away. She could reject the apology. She could make Daniel feel as small as he'd once made her feel. Instead, she chose something different. "I forgive you, Daniel, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve peace. I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope you become the man you're capable of being." Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "You were always too good for me." "No," Grace corrected gently. "I was exactly right for someone who could appreciate me. You just weren't that person." She paused. "But maybe one day you'll be that person for someone else. I genuinely hope so." As Daniel walked away, James pulled Grace close. "That was incredibly generous." "It was necessary," Grace replied. "Holding on to anger would give him power he doesn't deserve. This way I'm completely free." 6 months later, Grace stood in a different venue, the grand opening of the See Your Worth Foundation, her organization dedicated to helping women escape abusive relationships and rebuild their lives. Mama Eunice cut the ribbon, tears of joy streaming down her weathered face. Mrs. Adeyemi supervised the catering, and James stood beside Grace, now wearing an engagement ring that matched the one on her finger. "From nothing to everything," Mama Eunice said, embracing Grace. "But you were never nothing, child. You just needed the world to catch up to what you always were, precious beyond measure." That evening, Grace stood on the foundation's balcony watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and purple. She thought about the woman who'd sat in the rain 18 months ago, broken and afraid. She thought about the journey from that bench to this balcony, from worthless to priceless, from managed to empowered. Her phone buzzed. A message from a woman she didn't know. I just left my abusive husband. I have nothing. I saw your story and it gave me courage. Thank you for showing me it's possible. Grace smiled through tears and typed back, "You're already free. Everything else is just details. Come to the foundation tomorrow. We'll help you build your new life. You're not alone anymore." She sent the message and looked out at the city, at all the lights representing all the lives, all the stories, all the women who might need to hear what she'd learned. Your worth isn't given by others, so it can't be taken away. True value cannot be hidden. It will always find its way to light. And sometimes the person who throws you away does you the greatest favor. They free you to find where you truly belong. Grace Okafor had been told no man would ever want her. She'd discovered something better. She wanted herself. And from that wanting, everything else had grown. What lesson will you take from Grace's story? Have you ever discovered your worth after someone tried to diminish it? Share your journey in the comments. Your story might inspire someone who needs it today. If Grace's transformation touched your heart, hit that like button and share this with someone who needs to remember their value. Always remember, you are not what happened to you. You are not what they said about you. You are the strength that rose from the ashes, the courage that said, I deserve better, and the wisdom that chose yourself. Until our next story, know your worth, claim your power, and never let anyone convince you that you're anything less than extraordinary.